Welcome to today's session on budgeting cycle. So, as you know, this is one of the most important activities or projects that any FP&A team usually works on during this time of the year, which is typically August, September, October, November. This is the time when you start preparing your or you start updating your budget numbers for the next financial year. Okay, so that is the reason we're doing this at this time. I'm sure a lot of you might have already worked in the budget cycle already, and some of you may want to understand how it works from this webinar. So, just so that I understand, how many of you you can type yes or no in the chat box. So, let me know how many of you have already worked and experienced working in a budget cycle in one of the organizations. So, type yes or no in the chat box so that I understand that you have or you haven't experienced this already. Okay, so BJ says yes, Manasa says no, Ismail says yes. Okay, so I think there is mixed audience. So some of them have participated and some of them have not. So, so what I'll do is I'll go slow, and for the people who have already worked in the budget earlier, they can also share their experience while I am sharing mine. So as you know, what you will see in the next 1 hour is going to be experience of working on budgets, which will be my personal experience. And I'd love to know if you all have had similar or different experiences, so we can have a discussion as well. What I'll do is I'll mute everybody so that there is no background noise for the next 45 minutes or so. However, if you have a question, you can raise your hand or you can put it in the chat box and then I'll come to you at regular intervals. Also, there is last 10 minutes I've reserved for the Q&A. So if we don't get to the questions in between, then we will take the Q&A at the end. So feel free to raise your hand or put it in the chat box so that the class we can use this time efficiently. Okay, so let me get started. Okay, so now that I knew some of you have already worked in the budget and some of you, for some of you, it's a new experience. Let me quickly go through some of the basics before we get into the today's topic. Okay, so I'll quickly do my introductions for some of you who may not know me. So I've been working in finance FP&A for over a decade now, and my most recent role was FP&A lead for APAC region for one of the edtech companies, largest edtech companies, and that is when from that role I and my co-founder Dhawal started FP&A Professionals Institute back at end of 2022, beginning of 2023, so about 3.5 years back. And over the last 3.5 years, we've trained more than 6,000 students across all of these certifications, including the FP&A Foundations, FP&A Masterclass, FP&A AI for Finance and FP&A, CGFPA, which is one of our flagship programs and certification. So we have trained over 6,000 students across all of these courses, certifications that you see in FP&A. So that has been FPI journey so far, and our flagship certification is the CGFPA certification, which is Certified Global FP&A Professional Program, which we do a live cohort every quarter. So I'll talk more about this at the end of the webinar. Okay, so what are we going to cover today? So first we'll understand what is budgeting and why do we do budget. So we'll spend maybe 5 minutes on that so that we have a good context and we understand why are we doing the budget every year. And then we'll talk about the different stages in the budget cycle. So it is going to be three different stages: planning stage, execution stage, and the consolidation and the review stage. So we'll spend good amount of time on each of the stages and then I understand how the entire cycle works during the period of August to November in most organizations. Okay. So before we even start and talk about the budgeting cycle, I just wanted to bring this slide to you. This is from one of my books, which is all about FP&A, where we talk about FP&A's role. So one of the role of FP&A is to act as a bridge between the different business teams. So on the left hand side, you see different business teams like marketing, sales, product, engineering, operations, supply chain. These are different business teams. They may not be directly interacting with the board or the CEO. So who's the person or who's the team who interacts and acts as a bridge between the business teams and the senior management or the board of directors? It is the finance and the FP&A team. So FP&A team is responsible, especially today for today's topic, we are discussing the budgeting cycle. So the FP&A team will be the team who would be responsible in collecting the budget numbers, making sure that the budget numbers are making sense, consolidating them, reviewing them, and then the final budget, the final company level budget, is presented by the finance and FP&A team to the CFO, CEO, and the board of directors. So that is how the FP&A team acts as a bridge between the business teams and the senior management while doing the budgeting process or while managing the budgeting cycle. Okay, so budgeting is one of the key activities for FP&A teams. In terms of when you look at the typical monthly calendar, you will not find budgeting in that. So most of FPN teams will spend their first week in closing the books or ensuring the books are closed as soon as possible, and then doing management reports or monthly reports, month end reports, whatever you want to call it. Basically, these are MIS that are used by different departments for making decisions. Then after that, immediately you do forecast, and then you get into week 3 and week 4, and then week 4 is more of again preparation. You do start the flash reports, and then you start again for the next cycle. Okay, in this week in this monthly calendar, you do not see the budget. Budget is because you do that once in a year, you don't see that in your monthly calendar. You have a separate calendar for the budget, which is what we will be discussing today. However, it is important to understand this calendar as well, because if you don't do the budget right, then you will face a lot of challenges when you are doing your month end reports, when you are doing your forecast. Because every time when you do the month end reports, you will have to explain a variance between the budget and the actuals. So that is the reason you need to understand, you need to get the budget as close as possible to what everybody intends to do in the next year, so that your work during the during the year for management reporting variance analysis becomes much easier. Okay, so there's a question in the chat box: how do we forecast? So we will take that question at the end. So let us first understand. First, we'll do the today's session, which is on budgeting, and then I can spend some time on the forecasting. It is a completely different, I would say, completely in-depth topic, so we'll not be able to spend a lot of time on that, but I will address that question at the end. So once you understand the budget, we'll spend few minutes on the forecast as well. Okay, so let me move on. So you saw the typical monthly calendar where you do not see the budget. Okay, however, budget is one of the important factors that will influence this calendar, so you need to keep in mind that you get the budget right. Okay, so that is a key takeaway from this slide. Okay. In terms of what is budgeting, so most organizations and even we in our personal lives, we usually have a vision for long term. What do we want to achieve as goals for the next 3 years, next 5 years? Same is for the corporates. Every company would have a medium to long term goal. In this example, let's say the company has a goal to double its revenues or 3x its profits in the next 5 years, or get into four more geographies, or increase the headcount up to 1000. Okay, so this is an example where these are the long term goals of the organization for the next 5 years. Now what budget does is budget helps the organization achieve this long term vision by preparing or by helping them set annual targets. Okay, so although this is a 5 year vision, you need to make sure that you do work towards it in the year 2025, in the year 2026. So every annual target will lead towards this vision, which is going to be the long term vision of the organization. Okay, so what the budget does is it translates your long term vision into an annual business plan, which you can execute in the immediate next year. Okay, so what is the revenues that will be required in the next year? What are the expenses that will be in the next year? That is how we will arrive at some profit, which will lead us to the long-term vision. So if you want to get to double the revenue of current revenue in the next 5 years, at least your next business year should have a 15-20% increase over the previous year. And eventually you will get to the 2x revenue that you want. Similar goes for profit, similar goes for the other drivers. Okay, so that is the annual budgeting exercise, or the what is the annual budget, or what is the annual plan. Okay, a lot of people use it interchangeably. So budget, plan, target, these are some of the different terminologies you may hear while you are doing the budget. Okay, so budget, commitments, target, plans, these are typically interchangeably used. Okay, now we come to the main topic for today, which is the budget cycle. So we have, as I mentioned, three different phases: the planning stage, the execution stage, and then the final one is the consolidation and the review stage. So we'll talk about each and every stage, each of these three stages one by one, and we will spend good amount of time on that. Okay, so let me quickly start with the first phase, which is planning stage. Okay, so what do we do in the planning stage? Typically, there are two main activities. One is the development of budget guidelines, or you could call it review of the if you already have them from the previous year, review of the budget guidelines. Okay, that is one of the most important activity. Let's see what that is. Okay, so it is very important to have certain rules while you are doing the budget. Otherwise, what will happen is every team in the organization or every department in the organization will do something be which will not be in sync with what everybody wants. Okay, so whenever you are dealing with multiple stakeholders, multiple departments, multiple teams, it is always good to have some standardized rules so that everybody is following those rules, and then at the end it is easier for the FP&A team or the finance team to be able to manage the entire project, or in this case manage the entire budgeting cycle. Okay, so these are some examples that I have seen in my experience. You can also type some of the examples that you have come across. Again, I am going to be repeating that these are some examples. Okay, these are not, this is not an exhaustive list that you can just take and put it in your budget guidelines. You will need to develop your budget guidelines based on your organization, based on your internal discussions that you have, based on the challenges that you are facing from the previous year. So I'll tell you what are the best practices to create budget guidelines, but these are some of the examples. Okay, I'll bring them one by one. So budget should be submitted using the provided templates. Very simple, right? Different departments cannot just send any format and any Excel file that they wish to send their numbers in. You will be preparing the templates, and then everybody needs to use the same template so that when you get back the numbers, you are able to easily review them and consolidate them. So it is easier for the FP&A and the finance team to review and consolidate. Okay, I'll bring them one by one. I'll not talk about each and every item, but I'll just quickly talk about some examples so that you get an idea what the budget guidelines could look like. Okay, so ensure right phasing of expenses. So one of the guidelines could be that what happens sometimes is you will get the number from the business teams, but they will give you an annual number, or they will give you, this is my travel expense for the entire year. Okay, that is an important information. However, you also need, apart from the annual number, you also need the right phasing, meaning how that number will be spent in Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4. Okay, how much of money you will be spent in January, February. So you need to make sure that you also get the right phasing of the expenses when that money is going to be spent during the year, and not just the overall number. Okay, another good practice or guideline could be that you require to submit detailed justification if you want, say, 5% more money than the previous year. So anything plus minus 5% is fine, but anything more than 5%, you need to provide a detailed justification of why do you need more than 5%. Okay, or whatever that percentage is, right? It could be the inflation or whatever the percentage that you can define. So they need to provide detailed justifications. Okay, or you could say we need detailed justifications for each and every expense line. Okay, that is also possible. So based on what approach you're following, if you're following incremental budgeting or zero based budgeting, based on that you could define your budget guidelines. Okay, so these are some examples. The one more I will talk about is, say once the quarter is over, what should we do with the unused budget? Should we roll it forward to the next quarter, or should we go give it back to the corporate team, and they will decide what to do with that money. Okay, so you need to define what will happen if the budget is unused for the month or for the quarter or for the year. Okay, what will happen to that budget, or what will happen to that money? Okay, or similarly, if you have exhausted the budget midway, say you have $100,000 budget for the quarter, and you have used the entire $100,000 in the first 2 months only. So what will happen then? Okay, all of those things or scenarios you can define in the guidelines so that people are aware upfront what is going to be the what is going to be happening in case any of those scenarios arrive during the year. Okay, so these are some examples of the budget guidelines. I'll take a quick pause. If you want to take a photograph or a screenshot, you can do that. Or if you want to share some of your experiences of budget guidelines, you can also do that in the chat box. I will go to the chat box now. Okay, so we discussed the first step in the planning, which is reviewing the budget guidelines. Okay, what all other things usually happen in the budget guidelines? If you are working with, say, multi-currency, you may also define the what is the exchange rate you will be using to translate the numbers from USD to the local currency. Okay, you could also put that in the budget guideline. Okay, that number usually changes, right? Exchange rate changes every day. So you don't want the numbers to be moving every day because of the exchange rate changing. So you can set one exchange rate and use that for the budget preparation. And at the end, when you arrive at December, you can then change the exchange rate and then lock the numbers. Okay, so these are some examples. I will look at the chat box if there are any examples you want to share, or else we will move on to the next step. Okay, so once we have the once okay, what are the I'll quickly take the question in the chat. What are the budget around 1, 2, 3? What's the difference? Okay, so budget around 1, 2, 3 is typically different. It could be one of the two. It could be either different versions of the budget. So, for example, if you have prepared one version of the budget, a review happens. Okay, and after the review, they ask you to make some changes. You do those changes and then do another review. So then that becomes the second round. Okay, and then after the second round of review, you get some more feedback and you get some more changes. You make those changes and you go back for the third review. Okay, so those are the different budget rounds. Okay, it could be many different situations. So for example, if you have a regional setup, you could do the first level of review with your country team. Okay, once the country team is review is done, that is the first round. Okay, then you will go to the regional team. Say for example, I used to work with a regional setup where the first level of review was with the India CFO or the India CEO. Okay, that was the first round. Then second round used to be with the APAC CEO or the APAC CFO, and then after that the final round used to be with the global CEO. Okay, so those could also be the different budget rounds. Okay, so that is what the different budget rounds typically are. Okay, after we look at the yeah, so that could be different timing. Okay, so that could be also based on the different timings. So uh, round one in January, round two after a few months, or something like that. So you could decide that. So if you want to take inputs at different intervals, then you can decide that. However, January is typically too late if you are talking about the Jan to December calendar year. If you are doing that in January, then maybe your accounting year is something different. It might be April to March or something else. Okay, so let's move on to the next step and we can take more questions at the end. Oh, the next step is one of the most important one, and we'll spend good amount of time here. So next step after you have released the budget guidelines or you've shared the budget guidelines is to prepare the budget calendar and share the templates. Okay, so uh, think about budget like an important event in the corporate life. So for example, when you have an important event in your life. Okay, some examples I can think of is whether when you are giving an important examination like a CA or a board examination or a 12th standard examination. Okay, when you do that, you don't just go and appear for the exam, right? You make sure that you prepare well in advance. So just think about that as an example. So what you would do, you would spend 6 months studying about the exam, right? You will spend, if the exam isn't happening in December, you will spend March to September studying about the exam. Then you will spend some time doing the revision for 1 month. Then you will do some mock exams and you'll do some practice tests, and then eventually you will be ready for the final exam. So budget is very similar to that for the company. You don't just go and do the board review like that. You need to prepare for it over the periods, and it is typically during August to November. And the board review typically happens end of November, beginning of December for most organizations, which are following the calendar year, Jan to December. If you're following a different year, then it will be adjusted accordingly. Okay, so let us assume that the board review is happening in this example. The accounting year is the calendar year, Jan to December, or the financial year is the calendar year, and the board reviews are going to happen on the 15th of December. After 15th of December, people will disappear for Christmas vacation and the New Year holidays. So 15th of December, the final board review is going to happen. For this review to happen, all of the steps will need to be worked upon in going backwards preparing for this. So consider this as the final exam. Now you need to prepare for the mock exams, you need to prepare for the revision, you need to prepare for the classes. All that will come in before that. Okay, so let's say the CEO tells the CEO tells everybody in the company that I need at least 3 weeks before the board review. I need to review the numbers at least 3 weeks before the board review. Okay, why? Because CEO may want to make some changes, make some adjustments, and CEO is not free to just right. The CEO may have 100 other things in his or her calendar, so he may want that review to happen like 3 to 4 weeks before the board review. So that could be another important event. So 15th November is the CEO and the CFO review. Okay. Now for this to happen in on 15th of November, the consolidated budget needs to be ready by end of October. Why? Because the FP&A team will need to have 1 or 2 weeks to prepare the final CEO review deck. Okay, so if they have the consolidated budget by the 30th of October, then they will be in a position to prepare that final presentation or the PDF or whatever the final deliverable is, which will be presented to the CEO on 15th of November. Okay, so they need to have the consolidated budgets ready by 30th of October. Okay. Now, for this to happen, all of this to happen on 30th of October, they need to ensure that the templates are shared by beginning of September. All the meetings and discussions happen during that September month. Departments submit their numbers on time by end of September so that the FP&A team can consolidate and review the numbers, make some changes if required, give it back and ask for revisions if wherever required, so that everything happens during this September and the October month. Okay. And then for that to happen, you need to start planning for the entire project, which is the budget cycle. You need to start doing the planning in the month of August, which is right now, which is mid of August. So you do the planning, which is the budget guidelines that we just discussed, and prepare the budget calendar in the month of August. Okay. So now this is just an example. Depending on when you have your board review, you can work backwards, and depending on the size of the company, you can decide how much time you need. Also, you need to keep in mind that this is not the only thing that is happening during the August to November. There are other events that are also going to happen. There could be a company offsite where the entire company will be not available, or the people will not be available for 2 weeks because they are going on a company offsite for 2 weeks. Okay, there could be a quarter end. So 30th September is typically a quarter end if it's a listed company. Okay, they will be busy in the quarter end for at least 2 weeks. So there will be no time to look at the budgets for from end of September to mid of October. Again, they will come back to the budget in mid of October. So you need to keep in mind a lot of other events that are going to happen. There could be new product launch. There could be some other event that the company will need time and they may not be able to devote to the budget, or the financing may need to devote to some other projects. So keeping all of that in mind, they need to plan the budget calendar accordingly. And that is what the first phase is, which is the planning stage. You are preparing the planning, or you're doing the budget calendar, which is looking at something like this. Also, you could create a Gantt chart like this where you show different stages, how they are happening. So some of these are happening parallelly as well. So if you can notice, the budget planning is happening from week 1 in August to week 2 in September. Also, the preparation is starting in week 3 of August. So these two are happening parallelly. Similarly, consolidation review is happening parallelly. And then the final CFO, CEO review is happening in the November, mid of November. Okay, so some of these activities could also happen parallelly. Okay. This is the budget calendar, which is the second part of the first phase, which is the planning phase. Okay. All right. So let's go on to the second phase now. So we talked about the planning stage. One more thing which is between the planning and the execution is start of execution phase is the when you start you're doing the so part of it is planning also and part of it is execution also. I'll talk about what is what. So the next is going into execution. Now one of the most important things that you need to do while you're executing is you need to make sure that you submit the budget templates properly to the different departments so that they are able to give back to you the data or the numbers in proper format. Okay. So that is the budget template sharing. It's between the planning and the execution. So planning part is when you prepare the budget template and you have it ready and you test it. That is the planning part. And when you share it with the teams, that is where it goes into execution. And let me share some example of a budget template so that you get an idea. You can go into, let me see if I have some examples. Okay, so let me quickly check. Okay, so I'm just opening up an example from one of the projects that we have in CGFPA on budget. So let me open that once. Template or a sales budget template, which you give out to the different teams. Okay, so let me just quickly walk you through the template. Okay, now this is a template for a product-based company where you have different products or ice creams. Okay, so you have different types of ice creams, which are the products of the company. Okay, and you're trying to collect the revenue inputs from the sales team. Okay, so what do? You give them the actual volume numbers for the previous year, okay, which is the previous year number. So you give them that, and then you ask them for the current year numbers. Okay, what is the best estimate according to them that they will do or deliver in the sales volumes for the next year? So they will give back to you the updated template. Now this template will go to the sales head, and then based on the different teams will work on it, and then the consolidated file will come back to you. So they will update the volume numbers, and then you have to based on the pricing assumptions, you can work out the what is going to be the revenue number. So in this case, there are two drivers, which is volume and price. In your case, in your organization or in your industry, you could have different drivers. However, you need to ensure that you collect those driver numbers. In this case, it is the volume number, whatever it could be, something else in your case, so that you can work with that number and then arrive at the revenue number. Okay, in this case, we are collecting the volume numbers and then we have the pricing numbers separately, and then we will multiply pricing, volume, and discount, subtract the discount, and then get to the sales or the revenue number. Okay. So what happens typically is you will submit this template, you'll prepare this template, you'll ensure that the template is properly prepared, you will lock the cells where the inputs are not required, you will only keep those cells which are open where inputs are required, so that it's easy for the business teams to update and send it back. Once they update it, they will send it back, you can then consolidate. So what will happen is you will not have one sheet like this, you will send this to five different sales teams. Okay, they will send you five different templates, and then you'll have to consolidate it all together to get the overall company revenue number. Okay. So this is one example of the sales or one example of the sharing of templates, where you prepare the templates, you ensure that you test those templates, and then you send it out for the business teams to update them. Okay. Now it's not just that sharing of the templates will get you the numbers. Okay. What you need to do is, as we saw in this timeline, you need to make sure that you are sharing the templates. Okay. What will happen if you just share the templates on 1st of September and then give them a deadline of say 28th of September? Will you get all the submissions in on 20th of September? Okay. Most likely no. Okay. You will need to have regular check-ins, meetings, discussions. Say you submit the template on 1st of September, you will need to set up a weekly check-in or a weekly catch up with the different teams and check what happens on 7th of September. You say if out of the five teams, three teams have started working on it, two teams are stuck somewhere. So you need to make sure that to you help them to proceed wherever they are stuck. Okay. They may ask you some questions, you may need to answer those questions. And you need to say by week 2 you will have 4 out of the 5 teams, and one of the team will be pending. Okay, and then final reminder will go out somewhere in the third week of September, and then you will have the all the submissions by the end of the month. You cannot just expect the submissions to happen if you just share the templates on the first and you have a deadline on 28th. You need to make sure that you have regular check-ins, help them wherever they are stuck, make sure that they receive all the guidance, training, whatever is required. If one of the teams is not able to do it, you may have to do it sitting with themselves. So you may have to do some hand holding as well. Your end objective should be you should have all the numbers by the end of the month or by whatever the target is. So that is what the sharing of the templates is. Now, for that you will need to do meetings. You need to make sure that you communicate the expectations properly. You need to make sure, tell them there's a hard deadline. You will not wait after that date, and your submissions will be flagged. So you need to make sure that you manage difficult stakeholders properly, and manage the entire execution process. Okay, once you have all the numbers, you will then be ready for the next step, which is review and the consolidation. Okay, we just saw the Excel template. Okay, so the final stage after the execution is the reviews and consolidation. So once you have all the templates, you will consolidate all the templates. So which is fairly simple. If you have two departments, you just need to add them up together. Typically, companies will have 20 different departments or 5 different products. Okay, you will need to add all of that together and create a company level budget by having all the pieces together. Okay. While you are doing that, you also need to make sure that you review the numbers properly. Some of the common things that you look for are movements over the previous year, or what is the change versus the previous year. Okay. If there are any material changes, you need to understand what is driving them, because you will be questioned on them when you do the review, or when you get when you review the numbers with the board. Okay. Or the CEO and the CFO. You need to understand what is the reasons for variance, what are the drivers which are causing those variance. Okay, you need to provide some proactive guidance. Say, for example, the one of the departments forgot one of the items, one of the line items for revenues or expenses, and you know that it was there in the previous year. So you need to proactively tell them, okay, this was the line item, or this was the expense that happened last year. Are you sure you don't want to include it in the budget? Okay, then they will tell you, oh no, no, we forgot about it. Thanks for reminding. We'll add it and get back to you. Okay, so you need to look for the numbers or the trends or the historical numbers, and then provide some proactive guidance wherever you feel they have made a mistake or they have missed something. Okay. Okay. So that is what the budget reviews is typically. Okay. And finally, once you have reviewed the numbers, if you are doing it manually, you need to upload it into the planning tool. Or if you nowadays you do all the planning inside the tool itself, so all the things happen inside the tool. But if you're using manual Excel, then you need to ensure that you upload the numbers in the final tool that you're using for the EPM or the enterprise planning, and then lock the final version. And once that is done, you will then be ready for the final reviews, which will happen at different levels. So you will have a FP&A manager review, then the CFO will review, and then the final CEO review will happen. Okay, in some cases, it could be the country level review, regional review, global review. Okay, depending on how the company is set up. Okay. So once the consolidation is done, different levels of reviews happen, which we discussed, like round one, round two, round three. It could be between manager, CFO, and then the CEO, and then the board, or it could be country level, regional level, or the global level, depending on how the company is set up. So that is the entire budget cycle, which is right from the we started from the planning stage, where we started with the budget guidelines and the calendar, to the final approval by the board. So final stage is typically fairly straightforward. Once the CEO has reviewed the numbers, the board is more interested in the strategic uh, direction where the company is going. They will not usually get into the numbers into too much of details, although they will ask some questions for which the answers need to be ready from the CEO. So final board approval is at a very high level. They usually ask for questions which are on the strategy and on uh, the objectives of the organization versus getting into too much of the numbers. They would expect the CEO and the CFO and all the FP&A team members have done all that work before they come to the board for the review. Okay, so that is the entire budget cycle: the planning stage, the execution stage, and the consolidation and the review. And that is what I wanted to cover today. Uh, I'll take a quick pause, see if there are any questions before we move forward. Okay, so let me continue then. So, apart from the different stages that you saw, apart from that, what you also need to know is you have different parts of the P&L that are usually required to be built for doing the budget. Okay, so in a big organization, somebody will be working on the revenue budget, somebody will be working on the production budget and the inventory budget. Some person might be just looking at the direct materials budget. Okay. When I was working with one of the manufacturing companies, I was only responsible for looking at the materials budget. Okay. Rest everything was done by somebody else. So in a large organization, you may be just looking at one line item in a very large setup. Okay. Together all of this will be your cost of goods sold, and you have your marketing and the sales budget, admin budget, R&D budget. So different budgets you need to build together, and in many cases you will be working with different team members to put together a view. Or you could be also at the consolidation or the head office, and you could be the person who would be responsible for putting together or consolidating all the budgets together. So that is also an FP&A role where you're working in the headquarter or the head office where you're doing the consolidation. So either you could be working in one of the account lines or at the headquarters, or you could be working for one of the countries or the regions, and the head office will liaise with you for the consolidation. Okay. So while we looked at the budget, uh, I wanted to highlight there are five different skills or five critical skills that typically CFOs look for. Okay, and all of those are demonstrated while you do the entire budgeting end to end. Okay, so core FP&A concepts are very important. What is budgeting? What is forecasting? What are the different techniques of doing budgeting? What are the different techniques of doing forecasting? Financial modeling. So all of this, if you're doing it in Excel, you need to make sure that you build solid, or you build best you use the best practices in financial modeling. Once the budgets are ready or once the consolidation is done, you also need to present it in a way that it is understood by the CEO, CFO. So there you will need data storytelling skills. Okay, and then business partnering is important because you will be dealing with the different stakeholders, and you need to make sure that while you are managing the budget cycle, you make sure you get whatever is required. There might be difficult people who you may need to work with to be able to get the budget numbers. Okay, so business partnering or stakeholder management is equally important. And finally, in today's age, you need to leverage AI, and AI especially for finance use cases, to be able to do your job in a much productive way or in a much faster way. Okay. So these are some of the five critical skills that CFOs usually look for in FP&A or the finance people. Okay. Now, uh, I'll just read out a couple of surveys. So one of the surveys says, which is the CXO Watch survey, which is a survey of 200 plus CFOs. Okay, so eight out of the 10 CFOs say that it is hard to find FP&A talent. Okay, and then there is another survey from one of the HR publishing company. Okay, so it says that 15 to 30% FP&A pay is higher than the regular finance and accounting role. Okay, so on one hand, it is hard to find the hard for the CFOs to find the FP&A talent. Okay, because a lot of times people are looking for only experienced FP&A professions, and there are not enough experienced FP&A professionals. So at some point, the CFOs will have to hire, or the companies will have to hire somebody who is new and who is ready with the skills for FP&A. Okay, so that is what I wanted to share. And finally, I'll spend 2 minutes on the CGFPA program. So our next cohort is starting soon, which is in September, which is going to be our cohort number 10. So we've done nine successful cohorts, or eight successful cohorts, and the ninth one is in progress. Okay, so CGFPA is a global certification accredited by UK CPD. You learn directly from CFOs and FP&A leaders. There are 10 comprehensive modules that I'll talk about in a bit. You learn with experiential sessions and examples and case studies. So it's not theoretical. We usually uh, use examples, case studies, discussions during the class. You become a part of the global FPI alumni network. You get sessions with the career coach who can help you uh, review your resume, or you can help you in preparing for your FP&A interview. You have access to the monthly Q&A sessions. So we do a Q&A session and a guest speaker session. So all of those happen every month. So you get access to all of that. And you have the best in class LMS where you have access to all the recordings and the learning material for the CDFPA curriculum. Okay. So overall, the CDFP curriculum has more than 50 examples in FP&A, 25 plus case studies. We use all of these tools, which are popular FP&A tools that you see on the screen. Also, there is a guided capstone project where we make you do the entire budget end to end using real life like data. So this is the entire CDFPA program. Now, about the 10 core modules, I'll quickly talk about what these modules are. So, budgeting and forecasting, the entire budgeting cycle that you saw today, we make you do that step by step using real life data. Okay, we teach you different budgeting methods, different budgeting techniques, different forecasting methods, forecasting techniques. All of that is covered in the budgeting forecasting module. AI for finance and FP&A, we uh, share all of the best practices using different AI tools like ChatGPT, Claude, Copilot. There are agentic AI tools that you see. So all of that is covered in the AI for finance and FP&A module. Management reporting is another core module where we cover different types of management reports. How do you prepare a headcount report? How do you prepare a sales report? What is a month-end report? How does a month-end report look like? What are different performance management frameworks? What is a balance scorecard? What is a KPI? What is a OKR? All of that is covered. What is how do you do profitability analysis, or how do you do variance analysis? All of that is covered in the management reporting. Then financial modeling is best practices of financial modeling. How do you implement all of that for FP&A use cases like building revenue models, doing three statement financial models, building cash flow forecast, uh, doing expense modeling. So all of that is covered in the financial modeling. Introduction to data analytics, we cover more than three different tools where you learn how to use SQL, how to use Python, how to use Tableau, how to use Power BI, where you will need you using these tools and programming languages to deal with large sets of data so that you can do the analysis in the best possible way. Financial analysis, it's not just ratio analysis that you need to know. You also need to understand different ways how FP&A team does the analysis. It could be based on driver based relationships, it could be price volume mix analysis, it could be horizontal vertical analysis. So there are 10 different ways of analysis that are covered in the financial analysis module. Storytelling presentation, as I mentioned, you just don't need to present the numbers, you also need to be able to tell the right story when you present the budget. So all of that is covered using frameworks and examples in the storytelling module. Strategy, you need to be able to handle high level strategic questions, and you should be able to understand how the senior management is thinking to be able to get yourselves invited to those conversations where you will be talking about the long term vision and the objective of the organization. And then finally, business partnering, we talked about that already. So how do you manage difficult stakeholders? How do you ensure that you get your work done without burning bridges? So all of that is covered using case studies and examples. Overall, this is a 100-hour curriculum covered over the 6 months, and this is a draft. I would say this is the timetable which we have for the next module, next batch, which is starting in September. The orientation is in second week of September, and the class starts in October. And we will have all of those core modules. So we will be doing all of those core modules on Saturdays between 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. IST. Okay, on Sundays, we have kept it for tools where you will learn Power BI, Advanced Excel, Tableau, SQL, all of the different tools that are required for your FP&A roles. Okay, you don't have to learn all of them. You can pick and choose whichever tool is going to help you in your role. And basically, what we have seen people do is they pick one or two tools and then they learn that in detail. Okay. What is the eligibility criteria? So eligibility criteria is you need to have a bachelor's degree, either a bachelor's degree or a professional qualification like a CA, CPA, CMA, uh, either one of the two to be eligible to apply for the CGFPA program. Okay. How do you get the CGFPA certification? You need to attend the sessions live. You need to have 50% attendance. And once the sessions are over, once the 6 months program is over, you need to submit the capstone project and pass the final examination, which is going to be a 2 hour MCQ exam. So once you complete all of that, you will be awarded the CDFPA certification. Okay. The next batch is going to start on 12th of September, as I mentioned. What you need is weekly 5 to 6 hours. So 4 hours on the weekends where you attend classes on Saturdays and Sundays, and then 1 to 2 hours you need to set aside during the week where you will either be reviewing the material or doing some assignment or doing some pre-reading for preparation for the next class. That is the CGFPA program. Okay, all right, Sri, all right, thanks Pragati, thanks Bijay, thanks everybody for joining. We will see you soon. Bye bye.